Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being patient with us, and thank you for coming out on your Thursday night to join in on this discussion. I'm really excited about this discussion. I'm excited about our panel. We've been having some discussions leading up to this that have been really fruitful, so I'm really glad that you all can make it. So this evening, we're going to be talking about cooperative economics, or co-ops, or solidarity economics, and just kind of talking about how these structures can be used as a way to maybe kind of offset some of the harms that are, put onto people in society by our capitalistic society. So maybe just talking about like how it works, what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks. So that's what we're going to be getting into tonight. So I wanted to go ahead and introduce our panel, which I'm so excited to talk to tonight. So we have Taji Amani, who's the business relationship steward with Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy. Very glad to have you, Taji. And we have Dr. Marisela Gomez, who is the co-founder of Village of Love and Resistance and Baltimore and Beyond Mindfulness Community. And they are also one of the co-founders of BRJA. So very happy to have Marisela with us. And we have Sean Smeeton, who is the co-founder of Taharka Brothers Ice Cream. So thank you all for joining us. Do we have So BRJA was founded in 2003 and is rooted in the Agents of Change workshop that began in 1996. We offer public workshops and events like this one. We have events every 13th of the month. We are anti-racism, anti-oppression, and organizational development consultant. ARAO education in the social services sector with partners at UMB Center for Restorative Change. We also are an internal learning community. So once again, thank you for joining us. All right, so our topic for tonight, cooperative economics, capitalism and blackface, or a black liberation model. So I'm going to now turn things over to Marisela. They're gonna do a grounding exercise with us, and also you guys are gonna have to get up and move a little bit. So just a fair warning.
Thank you. I was just reading, it said 1996. Where's Dottie? Dottie? 1996, can you believe it? Oh my God. Yeah, we were at the Agents of Change workshop way back then. And it's amazing to be here. Whenever I'm invited back into BRJ's arms, I feel very held to have something like this in Baltimore City over this long span is actually quite something, especially these days. So let's ground ourselves. So this is not any particular religious affiliation or denomination. It's just coming back to our breath, like especially in these times. I don't know about you, but I drove here, and that traffic on Orleans is something. So if it's okay, let's just put our feet down. We're lucky to actually have feet. Many people don't. So put our feet down, and if you feel comfortable, close your eyes or bring it to half close. Maybe just let it focus on a foot or two in front of you, something not moving. And let's just become aware of our body that we're so lucky to have. Maybe today at this moment is the first time we're remembering that we actually have a body. We're not just a head on a stick moving around in this world. And so from our body, from our feet touching the ground, we can bring our breath from the earth, from ancestors, from elements that we're rooted in. And let the energy of the ancestors and the elements come up through the soles of our feet and embody us, hold us, remind us that we're not alone, ever alone, actually. We're always connected to something larger. We're in solidarity with so much. And then we can breathe in, continue that energy from the earth into our legs, into our knees, into our thighs, into our hips, our pelvis, our belly, our chest, our shoulders, and And maybe just for a moment you felt your vertebrae lift up just a little bit, some space there, as you move that energy, that ancestor energy, that element energy of earth, water, wind, and fire, all the way through the head and through the crown of the head, and let it feel that this is a connection, this body is a connection between earth and sky. And maybe we feel a little bit more connected, more rooted. Imagining the roots in the earth, they go straight down, but they also spread out. So it's spreading out to the roots of the person next to you. And it's spreading out to the roots of the people on the other side of this globe, this circle, this earth. And so maybe just drop in, take a deep breath in, and drop into that connection that you have to all those when you remember them. So we'll just take one deep breath in together, breathing in like it's the deepest breath that you've ever had today. Fill your belly, and then breathe out and sigh all the day's worries out. We'll do that one more time. And sigh it out. All right, and you can open your eyes if they were closed and come back into this space together. Thank you. So we wanted to do a little exercise just to bring us into the topic of tonight's conversation. So there's not going to be much explanation about the content of it. I think it'll become pretty self-evident, and it'll give us a good set of elements for the discussion tonight. So I'm going to just hand out these just randomly, and you can share. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just like, just share. If you take one, just be prepared to stand up and come to the front. Share with the exercise.
We have one on one. Do we hold all?
Oh, no, sure. One. All right. So, Michelle and I are going to stand up here, and she has one that says solidarity economy, and I have one that says exploitive economy, and you have things on yours, and so just come and stand with, yeah, maybe you go there, because it's pretty much separated, isn't it? And just go where you think you fit, in a solidarity economy or in an exploitive economy. Like what the characteristics and values on your card fit. I'm representing the exploitive economy.
Well, do what you can.
Oh, yeah, okay. What else?
This is hard.
And maybe we start with the exploitive first, so we can then head in the direction we want to go. So we'll just go around, and if everybody could share what their sign says. Profits over people.
Top-down approach to building.
No democratic process for decision making.
Destroy the climate for profit.
One size fits all.
The rich and powerful get to make all the decisions.
Non-sustainable.
Now it says government society, the rich.
Government subsidizes the rich.
Society the rich.
Yeah. So I think we all found our place together. And so, Michelle, you have the Solidarity Economy Group, and
Do you
so
want them to read their
Yeah, please,
Okay.
if everyone could read.
Bottom-up approaches to building.
Democratic process for decision making.
Taking care of all people, not just some people. Mutual aid.
People over profits.
Sustainability.
Owning things together, cooperatives.
Different approaches to doing things.
So I think this is what we're discussing tonight, and we'll get more into what these mean as we try to head there. And the thing I wanna make a point of also is, even though I said it's quite separated, on the back of Michelle's, can you flip it over? It says exploitive, and on the back of mine, it says solidarity. And without awareness, that's actually how we move through this world. It goes very quickly from one to the other. And I see some of you shaking your head because you know what that means, right? Like, we have a lot of values about where we wanna be, and sometimes one step, we're like stepping in the values of a solidarity economy, and then the next step, we're stepping into the values of an exploitative economy, just because it's like the air we breathe. And so if we're not so aware and mindful, we actually move often between the two. And so I think tonight what we wanna talk about is how do we move more consistently in that direction, and notice when we're going from one to the other. All right, thank you, thanks for participating, yay. Yeah, I'll take those back, thank you.
This time I'm gonna turn things over to Taji, and he's going to give us some more historical background for the conversation.
Evening, everybody. My name is Taji, and I work with employed by BRJA, which is Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy. But I would come here, volunteer, whether I was with them or not. I'm one of those who are sold, right, on cooperative economics. And a lot of the ideas associated with that, broad and differently defined term. I've spent a few years working on a startup food cooperative initiative that was unsuccessful. We were working on a food cooperative in Cherry Hill. It didn't come together. I still think it could, but just in that process of trying to develop a grocery store that was owned and controlled by the community, you learn a lot. And now that I'm at a nonprofit that provides advice to small businesses that are cooperatives, I take what I learn and pass on what I can to other folks who are working on cooperatives. But just before we get into the discussion about, what role do cooperatives and what role does cooperative economics play in movements and Black liberation movements, right? Because there's a lot of definition that could happen there. We have a little bit of a 101 here just on like what cooperatives are, right? So you kind of know what we're talking about if we refer to a cooperative business. How many are familiar with cooperatives, businesses, or other types of cooperatives of any kind? Okay. Anybody just like never heard of it before? Probably wouldn't be a very appealing event. Okay. Anybody shop, like at a co-op, like as a member shopper of a co-op? Yeah, okay. Or anybody work in one? Work in a cooperative? See the tar pit, yeah. Okay. So this is a unique group because you can go through all kinds of education, right? University, business school, whatever, and never hear about a co-op, right? You'll never hear about a business structure that is centered on collective ownership. I'm sorry. Well, that's why why you wanted to go. And yet, it's a very viable, way of running a business. It's kind of niche. There are not a lot of cooperatives. But let's get into what they are before we talk about their role. So a cooperative is an institution that is centered around its membership at its core. They're people-centered, ideally owned and controlled by their members. And when you put members at the center of the decision-making apparatus in your business, as opposed to shareholders, you fundamentally change the set of values that are being considered in whatever system you're building in that business, right? For shareholders, especially remote shareholders who might just buy stock on the stock exchange, they're pretty much concerned with extracting as much financial value as they can, right? If they can get a dividend at the expense of, investing in workplace safety or a more livable wage, then they'll go ahead and do that, and that will reflect their governance, the way they run the business, right? But when you have members, people who maybe shop at a business or work in a business, at the core of that decision-making apparatus, you fundamentally change the system in which you're making decisions, right? And this is what appeals to me about cooperatives. I think you can get a lot of the benefits that you get out of a cooperative business with just a cool boss, right? And in a lot of businesses, if you just have a cool boss, you can pretty much get the same benefit, right? Especially given the fact that most cooperatives are smaller in size. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Worker cooperatives, in particular, tend to be smaller in size. I think 8 people was like the median. So they're not employing a ton of people. And I think there are broader reasons for that. But what's good about having a system that doesn't rely on having a cool boss, right, is that you can build your system around your principles and around democracy, right? If democracy is one of your principles, like so many of us believe it is. It's also worth mentioning that some cooperatives are economic. So like where I work, we're mostly working with small businesses that are trying to make a profit and pay bills and stay alive as a business. But there are also cooperatives that are not purely commercial, right? There are people who will just exchange gently used items, people who might know each other and share space together, whatever. There are all different types of cooperatives that may or not be so formally defined, right? So there's different ways of thinking about what a cooperative is. Oh, sorry, I didn't. But one central rule for many cooperatives is one member, one vote. You might not be able to see this here, but this says one member in black, one vote, right? Which sounds familiar, right? It sounds like democracy, something that we're supposed to be acquainted with. And that one member, one vote ethic is kind of what runs through these different types of, I would say, commercial cooperatives. So these 3 types of co-ops, these are one way to kind of break apart commercial cooperatives, business cooperatives that are trying to sustain themselves financially. So you have producer cooperatives. These are democratic businesses whose members are other corporations, right? They're other businesses, right? It can be a little confusing because all cooperatives are producing something, but in this context, this just means a cooperative that has members that are other businesses, right? Consumer cooperatives, these are businesses that are owned and controlled by the people who shop in that business, right? So if you have ever belonged to a food cooperative of some kind, for instance, there's Catonsville has a little food co-op over there, and there's several of these all over the country. And these are places where if you go in and you buy your produce, you can also pay a fee and fill out an application, right, and become a member of that cooperative, and that allows you to participate in running that business. You can elect members of the board of directors or run to be on the board of directors and participate in democratic decision making. Then you also have cooperatives, worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives are defined, their membership is defined by people doing work in the business, right? So if you're showing up or it's remote, whatever. If you're doing work in the business, that defines your contribution to the cooperative, your patronage activity, as opposed to just being a shopper, right, where you're actually purchasing something. And so worker cooperatives and consumer cooperatives, they're distinct from producer cooperatives because the members are actual people, right, like the normal human beings, as opposed to producer cooperatives where the members are corporations. I'm trying to breeze through this quickly, but is that kind of clear enough? Does that make sense? Okay. That's kind of what I wanted to get through before we get into the discussion, but yeah, that's broadly what they are. So I think we could move into the next part, unless you have other questions about this.
If people have questions, feel free.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a question. Similar to, I guess this is more on the business side, like a Costco. Is that like a cooperative member, you have to pay a membership? What's the difference?
Well, Costco isn't quite cooperative.
Right.
There are many types of grocery stores where you can have a membership, right? But the membership in and of itself doesn't make it a strict cooperative.
Right.
What makes it a cooperative is a democratic control of the members.
Because Costco's more business.
Yeah, are they publicly traded?
You know,
They might be on
they have like a
stock
membership
market.
fee in order to.
I think they're traded on the stock market, so
Oh,
they're
totally
owned by.
different. Okay,
Yeah.
my brain's there.
And you don't own a share in that, like, you don't get to make decisions about their labor,
Correct, because
their
it's
wage.
stock market.
Yeah, that,
It's like a subscription, right? Like you subscribe to your Costco and you get to go. to
Okay.
yeah,
I've been brainwashed, I'm sorry.
I think like linking member with decision maker
Mhm.
is really key,
I
would you
see.
say, in
I
cooperative?
see.
Yeah, because you're a member of Costco or Sam's,
Right,
but
you don't make decisions.
you don't make decisions about wages, about.
Not that, no, we just called them out that they weren't paying their people, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a housing co-op, would that be like a consumer cooperative?
Yeah, that fall into the consumer category.
When you said we like shop at, and have we ever, do you know Red Emma's is like a coffee shop and a whole bunch of other things? I heard that was like run by the workers, so to speak. Is that considered a cooperative or like?
It is,
Oh.
yeah. That's called a worker cooperative. So the people who work there also co-own that coffee shop.
For the worker co-op, your amount of work, it doesn't make a difference about how much your vote matters and that you just work there and you own it too, right?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, I'm saying, so like, in the worker co-op, is it, like, the amount of work you do there, does it determine how much your vote matters, or is it like still one member, one vote?
Oh, right. No, one member, one vote. The amount of work you're doing, like people will probably get paid differently based on how much work they're doing, or if there are like bonuses to be shared. Your activity in the cooperative may determine your share, but your voting power, right, is going to stay the same.
Thanks for the overview. I just have a quick question. I'm thinking of places like Bob's Red Mill. Are they a co-op? Or is there a difference between employee owned versus a co-op?
What was the name of the?
Bob's Red Mill?
Is that like the oats or?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know the details on them.
Yeah.
In 2020, they went totally employee owned, which is why I purchased from them now. But I'm like,
Okay.
is that different than a co-op?
Okay.
I'm not sure. They did not go public.
I don't know myself, if anybody else does, but I can tell you, so there are employee-owned companies, even 100% employee-owned companies, that may or may not be cooperatives, right? So I used to work at an employee-owned company, wasn't traded on the stock market, all of the ownership shares were held by people in the business, but it wasn't a democratic structure, right? It was just an employee stock ownership plan, right, or an ESOP. Not quite a cooperative because it wasn't democratic. Yeah. Still a great thing. Like I love to see people own the places where they work. Oh, so, yeah.
If it's a worker-owned co-op, what happens when someone leaves?
They leave.
They don't like get a vote anymore, like it's like,
Right,
it's
right.
done, like, okay.
Typically, yeah,
Okay.
if they're leaving, their membership will terminate,
Okay.
and so will their voting, yeah.
So they can't transfer to an heir or?
Not usually,
Okay.
yeah, in the vast majority of cases, no.
In the termination.
Yeah, yeah.
So they stop owning the business once they stop working there?
Right.
Okay.
Now, you can still participate financially, so people can be investors in a cooperative, right? People who aren't members of the cooperative can be financial investors. You can put money in, and they'll get their financial return, but they can't have any sort of say in the business, right? They can't tell people, the business what to do. It's just a purely financial thing. And so that might apply. So if somebody who worked at a co-op was leaving and maybe they put some money in as an investment, like just to support or whatever, they might get repayments over time, but that wouldn't come with any sort of voting privileges, right? Which is kind of the polar opposite of what a traditional corporate structure is, which is completely revolving around financial investment, regardless of their actual livelihoods investment in the enterprise.
Thank you so much, Taji, for giving us some background information about what co-ops are and what they do. Thank you all for your questions, they were great. At this point, we're gonna move on. Marisela, I wanted you to talk to us about, when you were up here doing the exercise, you were talking a little bit about how easy it is to flip from the ideals behind cooperatives into this more exploitive, capitalistic side. And I just wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about, like, in your work, what barriers you've seen towards staying on this cooperative side, what barriers you've seen, and also maybe like things that your organization has done to intentionally stay on the side of the ideals behind the cooperative.
Sure. Could we show this slide on the board?
Sure.
So I'm here representing Valar, Village of Love and Resistance. This one. So this is who we are. Our mission is to co-create a cooperative community in Baltimore owned by residents impacted by racist systems of uneven development. We seek to build this cooperative community through the reclamation of land, healing, reconnecting, and building a base of community power. Our mission pillars include building power and leadership with poor and low-income residents and East Baltimore Black residents that have been generationally impacted. Healing together through organizing practices, development strategies, programming and ways of being community, and co-owning land as a redistributive, cooperative, reparative, solidarity economic practice. So we're fairly new, Valar. We're Black and Brown led, and we bought 2 buildings in East Baltimore, in Old Town, Middle East Baltimore. And we are renovating and redeveloping these 2 buildings into the rectory, into 7 units of intentional living space, and then the church, about 13,000 square feet, into a community hub. And the reason that we're claiming cooperative as building a community is, besides organizing, which is the way we're building our power and leadership with residents, the buildings are going to become available for local residents to co-own. So residents will be able to buy a share in these buildings for as little as $10 a month, and no more than $100 a month. We're selective because we're actually trying to make sure that those who own are generationally impacted by historic uneven development practices. So you might say it's a bit of a reparative project, right? Because we're selectively looking for low-income Black people who have been historically affected by redline urban renewal and just the whole generational, removal of people from their properties to be the co-owners. So we want to have more than 300 residents in the local neighborhoods. We have zip codes that define which neighborhoods people can come from. There's gonna be an income, a restrictive income, meaning if you make more than a certain amount, you can't co-own. And a period of time of living in Baltimore. So that's basically our model of how do we build a community investment trust in such a way that that trust owns the buildings. So we're a nonprofit, Volar is a nonprofit, but what we're gonna be doing is having a subsidiary take over the buildings so that we can actually generate a profit, and our local co-owning investors who are gonna make decisions, right? They're gonna vote a board in, and they're gonna collectively make decisions about what happens in the housing and what happens in the community hub. The community hub's gonna have a daycare, it's gonna have a shared office spaces, shared workspace, what else? A wellness center, a couple pop-ups, an event space, and a community. It'll also be a community art space where we're going to house local community. Oh, and a commercial kitchen. So for people who are doing catering already at their house, maybe they want to up their where they're catering, they can come and rent the kitchen. So the income comes from what's happening in the building, and then it gets at the end of the year when we pay our bills and everything, etc., maintenance, blah blah. The difference at the end gets redistributed back into the shareholders, right? And you can live in public housing and still co-own this land. So this is really the very radical way that our project is coming forth, because historically we think of people who own stuff have to own stuff. You can't own stuff without owning stuff. In fact, you couldn't be an investor in the past without having like $500,000 in the bank. Who has $500,000 in the bank? Well, some people do, right? So historically, investors have been people who are already wealthy, and so because our country is really about growing the wealth of already wealthy people, right? It's really not about helping people without any income or property gain that, access that, right? So our project, we're replicating something that's already shown a lot of success in Portland, Oregon through Mercy Corp, where they did the same thing. They bought a plaza, they established businesses, and now they have like 400 local residents who live within the zips as co-owners. And at the end of the year, they get 6% or so return since they've been doing that. So anybody who's aware of investment know that 6% is pretty good. Actually, you know, you can maybe, I know, right? Maybe get 1-2% depending on the market. We only, we want it to be local, owned by local people. So we're very different from many of the things that are going on around the country now, where there's still non-local people buying stuff. I mean, we have that here, right? In Baltimore as well. So we're really interested in, and that's why we think of it sometimes as a reparative project, because we're actually trying to repair harm by making sure people who live in the community own stuff in the community. Why should you look at stuff happening? And our big thing is around community development, meaning historically in low-income Black neighborhoods, people with money, wealth, Hopkins, Under Armour, whatever. Now it's other developers who might not even live in the country, come and buy land, buy half a block, whatever, and redevelop it and turn them into expensive, moderate luxury condos, and they basically extract and exploit from the neighborhood. People who live there just watch. Oh, look at that. And eventually, if the amenities are also redeveloped, they fit the new people who come in, not the people who have historically lived there. So that's another kind of displacement. It's not like we're gonna outbid you, but you're out because you can't afford. Like in East Baltimore with Hopkins Development, people still don't go to the Walgreens because the prices there suit the new people who got there, you see? And so we're anti-gentrification, meaning that we're about local people own local stuff and should be able to shop in their community. So the big, I need to give the background because the big impediments is, the system wasn't made for a project like this, right? It's completely against the way, one, a person can be an investor, right? Two, the whole development of land by low-income Black people, like a Valar, is really different, right? Like, just trying to get a permit takes 6 or 7 months, unless you can expedite that. And expediting every permit that you go to the city adds money to the cost of redevelopment. So the structures that are our impediments now to really fully live into our, basically our dream is just the everyday systematic way that business is done. Because it's an extractive economy, that's normal, right? But if you're actually going to try and build an alternative economy where you have to think about people working together, helping each other, the whole mutual aid that was talked about, or not one size fits all. So that's what this is. This is like, it's not a one size fits all, but, and so if we really want to develop this, we have to step outside of what's typically done. Hiring local people, Black businesses, we go far, we go to DC to get a project manager, because we couldn't find a project manager in Baltimore City. This kind of stuff, where you're, like, all our people who are working, pest control, they're all either Black or brown. Property management, everything, right? We're staying consistent with. So it's not just, see, that's why the topic is so important, because it's not just how do we build co-ops, it's how do we build co-ops that are gonna take care and remedy the historic oppression of Black people, right? So we could have gone faster in our project. Right now, we're still looking for a property management company. It's taken us 6 months. We find one company, and it does a lot of cooperative, but the majority of the people who are leaders are white. And so we're really looking at that. So building cooperatives has to really look at, and that's why we have to always remember the solidarity economy characteristics and precepts, because if it's not taking care of everybody, and it's still continuing the same way that things are hierarchical, white-led, hetero-led, male-led, blah, blah, right? English-speaking led, right? Like that, then we're still not getting all of it. So the whole solidarity economy principles, and I think Taji will talk more about that, started in Latin America and Europe, and hit the US maybe in 2010s or something like that. That is saying, we want to build cooperatives, but we want to infuse it and build it from the ground with these principles. So it's a bigger ask to build co-ops that have these kinds of principles. So we go in with this. It doesn't happen by chance. Yeah, it's very intentional. But that's the only way we're going to change the world, right? We got to be intentional every step of the way. And so even when we're building co-ops, how do we make sure that we don't default back into cooperatives that still have the men making the decisions, right? Still have white people majority, things like this. Because, I mean, cooperatives, it's good because we're trying to change the economy, right? But if the people who are leading that are still the same people, like, what are we doing? And so that's why the Black cooperatives and not just Blackface capitalism is and the capitalism part's important too. And I'll stop talking now because, capitalism co-ops is also real. And maybe Taji, maybe you can talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking about all the ways in which you're intentionally making your organization different than, than what we see in our capitalistic society. That was really interesting. Thank you for that. At this time, Sean, I want you to talk to the group a little bit about, so when we were planning this event, one of the things we talked about was how, white privilege, it's easier for you to start a business, right? It's easier for you to get capital because it's a society we live in. And so one of the models can be to work towards Black liberation is if white people do start a business and build it up and then turn it over to their Black employees, which is what Sean has done. And I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about a little bit about your journey, a little bit of background, and kind of a little bit what that looked like when you did that.
Yeah, it's a real long journey. It started off as a nonprofit organization back in the early 90s. It was designed to be like a social enterprise where it's a nonprofit, but it generates about 70% of its own revenues to kind of be this self-supportive, like self-reliance is one of the principles of the organization. It was mostly people coming off of hard drugs. So we lived almost like in a commune setting in a house in Midtown Baltimore, and we had businesses that everybody in the organization would work with, and no one really got paid. All the money went into a big pot, and we just paid our bills and everything, and people tried to recover from substance abuse. It was a long-term project, someone would come in for like two to 4 years to try to work on, their personal growth. So that's how it started, and then there were some different influences that came across the leaders of the company that led us to maybe become a for-profit instead of a nonprofit. One reason was that we did want, Ben & Jerry's was a big influence on myself and some of the other people that started the company. And reading about they're a big inspiration. And they were one of the few companies in the beginning that used a corporation or a business to talk about social issues, environmental issues, political issues, things of that sort, which was kind of unusual at the time. It was kind of taboo. Wasn't suggested you do that. It was frowned upon because you'd turn people off and they wouldn't buy your product and stuff like that. But Ben Cohen, who was the Ben at the Ben & Jerry's, he felt like in his lifetime that that businesses had become the biggest influence over the fabric of society. It used to be like churches and government, but he thought that business had now become that big, powerful force. So we looked at that and we thought, well, maybe we could use our company as just like Ben & Jerry's, kind of ripped them off, copied them. Use our company as a way to try to bring some social change to Baltimore City, and then have our young people who were part of the nonprofit become owners of the business and kind of switch that paradigm from being a student or you can call them clients in a drug rehab program to owners and leaders of a business. So it kind of changed the paradigm a little bit. The company then has gone through even more iterations where we don't bring in people who were formerly incarcerated. There's different reasons for that, but the big goal was to use the platform of a business to bring about social change, and using our young leaders as the face and the messengers of that. So that's kind of how we evolved over time. I never owned the business. The nonprofit owned the business. It spun off. The ice cream company is its own for-profit entity, but in order to do that legally, you can't just give something away to a nonprofit. So it in exchange got the stock in the company. So the nonprofit owned 100% of the stock up to Harker Brothers, and then over time we went through the legal process to get the nonprofit to sell the shares to the employees of the Harker Brothers. Bread, where Taji's from, has been a huge, we wouldn't be around if it wasn't for them. They've given us a lot of loans. We just took out a $500,000 loan last year to double the size of our factory. We invested in a lot of equipment and stuff like that. Our business makes money, but not a lot. We wouldn't be able to get that kind of money from a bank. Their terms are really, they call it non-extractive or non-exploitive lending. We can be late on a payment, and they'll say, okay, pay it next month or something like that. They won't foreclose on us, things like that. So it's allowed our model to really exist financially. So that's been a big help for us. I guess I could talk, I don't know if that answers your question, but the sign where you flip it between the exploited and non-exploited, some of the problems that we have a lot of employees. We can get up to like 50 employees. A lot of them are part-timers, high school kids working during the summertime in our ice cream shops and stuff like that. Most of the core of the employees work back at the factory, they're making the ice cream, or running the catering business, or working in the admin offices. And you can get an us versus them, like the owners. It takes about 18 months to become an owner, or to qualify to become an owner. Then you get voted in, you become an owner. But you get a lot of sort of capitalism kind of comes in, because you've got hourly employees who don't have the vote in the business. Back to Taji's cool boss. We hope that our guys or women too can be like cool bosses to the other employees, but you do see where, like you said, we kind of, capitalism is the air that we breathe. We have to always check ourselves to make sure that we're not really operating like a typical capitalistic company. The owners are really, you might have 10 owners, but they're acting like your typical capitalistic owner, or have the potential to do that. So those are some of the things you gotta really pay attention to.
Thank you, Sean, for
Okay.
sharing. Taji, I wanted you to also talk a little bit about when we were all meeting and talking about how just being a co-op doesn't automatically mean that you're sharing in those ideals that we were talking about, like sustainability, one vote, one member, one vote. Could you share a little bit about examples that you know of co-ops that are going more towards the capitalistic end of things?
Well, I think that's the natural direction any cooperative would go. I think that's where most cooperatives do go, and not because they're evil, right?
Right.
I think it's where we start. So, like REI, I think is, I'm just dragging, REI is a co-op.
Yeah.
I think shopping is value too, so like a consumer co-op. They deal with issues of, not giving all the workers all of the things they're asking for in their sort of workplace environment. So a cooperative, the cooperative can, get into a labor dispute with its own union. A cooperative can greenwash. They can use marketing that is deceptive. So, like you're saying, it really matters about the values that people are bringing and carrying. So I think, there's plenty of bad examples.
Yeah.
Not because they're necessarily evil people, but I think that's just, and I think it should be assumed that is the default, especially in the context of like a conversation about liberation or social movements. I think it can be easy to lift any idea up as like a silver bullet or something, but no, it's definitely case by case. And so I would say it's a minority of cooperatives that are genuinely attached to movements that are trying to shift the basis of power. Some good examples of what you
Please share.
Yeah, some good examples, although none of them are flawless. I really look to what they're doing in Jackson, Mississippi, around Cooperation Jackson. Some of you may have heard of this organization that got going around 2014. And I think some of the dynamics between Jackson and maybe their state government and their demographics could be instructive in Baltimore. But so this is an organization that is basically trying to apply solidarity economy principles as they're developing cooperative businesses, right? So instead of doing the natural thing, which is telling a lot of Black entrepreneurs that starting a business is going to save your community, right? Instead of doing that, they're relying on deeper ideas, a broader set of ideas that they think can actually bring about changing the basis of power in their community, which is not confined to a small business or a co-op. it is connected to politics and political organization. And I would say, so one of the books that really woke me up out of this is by a local professor at Morgan State, Dr. Jared Ball. In 2020, he put out the first edition of his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Mind Power. And it was difficult for me because I had, at that point, been fairly encouraged by and kind of like wed to certain ideas about Black entrepreneurship being a mode of liberation, a possible path to like changing conditions in Black communities, right? And so the general outline is, you know, this is a capitalist system, you gotta have money to change systems, so where is money made? Oh, businesses make money. So we gotta start businesses that will give us the financial capital to affect the politics that will bring about the social change, right? That's the general idea that so many of us are sold into, and that a lot of energy got put into, I think after the civil rights movement, and to this day, I think a lot of us are still looking to that. And it's very appealing because it's a lot less dangerous than taking some kind of a political risk and actually addressing power. Yeah, definitely just, I would caution anybody in or near the entrepreneurship space like where I am, to be wary of the verbal trap of treating cooperatives or entrepreneurship broadly as a means of liberation or freedom. It's gotta have the intentionality and frankly the connection to politics behind it.
Very good point. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is for all of you on the panel. If there was someone in the audience that was thinking of starting a co-op, what advice would you give them?
I talked about a startup co-op. Well, it's the co-op part is easy. Like I'll put easy in quotes. It's actually not easy. It's very you gotta lean into the touchy-feely side of business. I remember when I was in college, one of the most popular class at the business school, that I didn't go to business school, the most popular class there was a class called Touchy-Feely. Right, so all these MBA types who knew that they wanted to go out and make money in regular corporate America, even they understand like, you know, there's something here, you do have to pay attention to how you're affecting people, how people feel about where they work. And that's important in cooperatives too, right? But in a startup, you really just got to focus on running a successful business. I think that is such a difficult thing to do in the first place. That's kind of what I try to have cooperative startups focus on. And I say that because a lot of cooperative startups, they come to the enterprise with a social model, right? Yeah. They see a cooperative as a means of social change, right? Which it can be, but if you're gonna run a business, you still do have to, learn a little bit about bookkeeping, reading financial statements, and all the other stuff that goes along with running a business. And then to one more thing, running a business is so risky, right? A startup enterprise is the odds are not in favor of any startup for any business. So a business like Taharka, to be around as long as it has, it's like a miracle baby, right? You ought to beat the odds in sustaining a small business for that long, and it's kind of a feat. It really is a feat. I think a lot of people who approach entrepreneurship from maybe a more idealistic or a brand new perspective don't necessarily understand what those odds are, especially when it's being sold to you as a liberatory vehicle. Now you're even more juiced up about taking these not so favorable odds, you know? So it's a difficult line to walk.
I think one of the other things, that, especially what I struggle with a lot, since I was from the nonprofit days and then the company evolved in so many different iterations. When we became the for-profit, it was me, an older white guy, and a bunch of young Black men and women, ages like 18 or 16 to a lot of them they were kind of enthralled in the idea of it becoming employee-owned, but back then the purpose of the company was really to create social change and to be radical and to, but also use ice cream as kind of like a little bait, to get people to come and listen and bring people together and talk about stuff. So it's gonna be kind of this radical company. Well, when your people are like 18, 19 years old, if you think of yourself, most people back when we were that young, we weren't necessarily, some of us weren't that radical. So when you give the person the vote, if they're not aligned in the same values, it can just take a left turn. It could go the majority rule. I mean, look at our country. So the country's taken a right turn.
Not a left turn.
Or left turn, yeah. So since the majority rules, you have to kind of, in the beginning, when you're starting, at least try to get your core founding group on the same level. And then as you bring people in, they'll probably be attracted to your company based on its values, and it kind of works its way out. But we had some real tough times in the beginning with people saying, I don't want to, I don't think the company should get involved in this, or I have polar opposite views, and so my advice would be, if you're going to start, and it's probably any business you start, you want to have a core group of people that kind of have this shared set of values and somewhat vision of the future of the company before you get too far along.
Okay, thank you. Marisela, do you have anything to add? Yeah, it's connected to you around the values part. I would almost suggest, and Jessica Nemhart Gordon talks about this. She's a Black woman who wrote the book Collective Courage. Anybody heard? You should hear about it and hear more about it. Basically what she did was chronicle the history of Black cooperatives in the United States of America. It's huge.
What's her name?
It's Jessica Nemhart Gordon. So she went back and did this 10 years of research, finding everywhere where there was Black co-ops, and really showed how, from after Jim Crow, so we have very specific definitions of co-ops now, but back then, in order to survive, Black people were cooperating, to survive. And so white people wouldn't sell groceries and things to Black people. So Black people had to come together and find a way to, have food, and then they could distribute and sell to each other. Those are cooperatives. So basically she does this long history since she could find data of Black cooperatives in the United States. It's an awesome book because what it does is just it reteaches us what a cooperative can be, and it gets back to the value of cooperation. I think we've kind of forgot the cooperation part in co-ops. And we do this, we get caught up in words, and then the word becomes a label, and we don't even understand what it means. And so, fast forward now 2025, and I was reading an interview they did with her where she says, we need to think about cooperative economics beyond finances, beyond money, where the focus should be more, and I know her personally, so if I mess up what she said, she'll forgive me, that the focus should be more on cooperation and less on economics. Now that's really hard for us now in the 21st century of the United States to even think about that. Just like Taji was saying, the way he got into it, right? It's about making money so that you can get political power. But Villar is about people power, right? So when our attorneys ask us, well, how are you gonna make money so that people get a return? What we talk about is the values. You're really coming together to own stuff in the community. You're getting to make a decision. You're actually creating a network of people, of similar-minded people who want to actually take care of each other. So there's care for each other, whoa, in business. You know what I mean? The touchy-feely thing. So Jessica is saying that, getting into business should not be about the individual, making themselves wealthy. It should be about, yes, having enough to eat and shelter, feed ourselves, and clothe ourselves. But we should be getting into business and economies now to make sure other people can also have food and clothing and shelter. So we are only into business to make sure we get what we need. So cooperatives really should go back to the way it originally started, especially in Black communities. And it's not just Black communities, right? I mean, when immigrants come to this country, what do? They like get together and they form communities where they can survive, right? I mean, if you look in some of the poor Black communities, there's Asian markets on corners, right? Why is that? Everybody's working in that shop, right? That's a cooperative. That's a group of people coming together. If you go up Jersey, you'll see a lot of immigrants who are cooperatively running gas stations, right? So when it's in the family, it's easy to redistribute it and it's easy to stay in care, but as soon as it goes out of that family situation, we seem to get really caught up in the capitalism. So what Valar is trying to do at the very beginning, and we've had our problems too, where people, and it comes back to the values, is when you start having access to stuff, you can really get pulled into the collective breath of capitalism. And you can lose your way. And so for us, for me telling anybody you're gonna get involved in co-op, I think we really need to do more work on what does liberation mean beyond economy. It has to go beyond the economy. It has to be about taking care of each other. It has to be about kindness. It has to be about loving each other. I know I said that word love, right? Business, love, like how does that even go together, right? But if we're gonna survive, we have co-created Trump. And it's hard for everybody to think about that. I know, right? You're like, what? I know, yeah, you're like, how did I do it, right? Yeah, I know, exactly. Well, you gotta look at how we've been living, right? You gotta look at how we've been living, right? And so we've co-created this economy together, and we're all sitting there saying, oh my God, how did that happen? Because we participated in a way where sometimes we can't identify. And so because of the breath, the collective breath that we all breathe together, I think if we don't shift really soon, we've co-created Elon Musk and his child. I know it's hard, right? And his child, and that child is gonna grow up. Yeah, think about that, right? Because that's our children growing up with that child. So it's nothing against a child, it's against what is being like infiltrated into that child's ears in the places that he is, and what is of value. So for me, it's also value, and it's really, again, when the attorney said, where are you gonna generate the income for people? We say, because Valar is not so much about the percent of generating, it's about value, it's about knowing your neighbors, it's about being able to perhaps live in Latrobe and point over to that building and say, I own that. And that I might not throw trash on the ground because I own that. I might not do certain stuff I may do, or let certain stuff happen in front of me and walk away, because now I own this building and I want people to feel safe going in that building. Do you see? It's a whole shift. It's not just about money, and this what we have like smallly and defined an economy. So what she says about, we have to start broadening this term economy and moving it out of the extractive, exploitative, capitalist way that the country was built on. Think about it, on the backs of Black people, the backs of indigenous people, on the backs of Asian people, backs of Latino people, right? It's always done that. And we haven't really done anything different yet. And so if we're really talking about building an alternative economy, a non-exploitative economy, a solidarity economy, all those values, where who would disagree with any of those values there that came into this room? Nobody. And yet how come we don't practice that? And who gets to determine whether we practice that? Well, we all do. But somehow we're stuck in this economy here. And why is that? Because we all do that. You know? So at some point, it's how do we, you know, I mean, Trump for me is like the test, is like the angel of mercy. Right? Yeah, this brother hears me, right? Because he's saying, look at where we're going. Do you really want to go with me on this? And at some point, we have to make a decision of how we're going to step across the line, because he's making the line like a tunnel. Yeah, and so, you know, he's like, he's a reminder. He's like, yeah, this is what you created. Look at me. Yeah, and the Supreme Court can't even stop him. That's another story. Yeah.
Thank you, Marisela. For the panel, is there anything else, any last words, anything you want to leave the audience with before we go to questions? Okay. All right, we'll turn it over to you all with questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first thing that popped in my head is America is like, I would say capitalism is very largely fueled by the hyper-individualism that's in this country, and it pretty much, that's one thing we all have in common, no matter what group we come from, marginalized or not. I mean, I can speak for like the Black community to some extent. I think a huge part of like hustle culture and the glorifying of entrepreneurship is like this very individualist, I have to get mine type of thing. And with us in particular, we've been pretty brainwashed because like Black people were the biggest socialists, not only like in the 60s and the 70s, we were like super socialists, like, but in general, I think America, the hyper-individualism is like one of the root problems. So my question is like, if I were to sell a cooperative to people, like, cause I know most people are not politically engaged, most people are not socially engaged. That's why a lot of people are like, how did Trump happen? Because they don't really pay, I'm not trying to like sound patronizing or anything, but like a lot of people, they don't socially engage because they don't have time, because time is also another currency that people just don't have because of capitalism. So it's like a vicious cycle. I don't have time to, you know, but I know I'm suffering, right? But if someone were to, if you would sell cooperative to most people, they would be like, I wouldn't take that risk, or you're just like being overly idealistic. That's what I always get when I, even like with, I know not everyone agrees with socialism, but even with something like socialism, people have this idea of like, oh, that's just too unrealistic. Human beings are not capable of that. Human beings are naturally greedy, which is bullcrap because we're social creatures that historically been communal almost throughout all of human history, and capitalism is an experiment, sorry, that failed. Sorry, I got on my soapbox. But so how do you convince people to, in my opinion, go back to what is actually natural for humans, which is communal living, when they've been so like capitalism pilled, like they've been so like brainwashed by capitalism. Like, how do you sell that to something like a regular person, you know, in a way in which they can understand how it benefits them, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
Does anyone on the panel take that?
That's a social, I mean, that's just social society, you know? It's the way society is right now.
Socially engineered.
So I think it would probably take a social movement to somehow reverse that or make a different alternative, which, again, that was one of my fascinations around businesses, was how much they, you know, just because they do advertising and everything else, they can kind of use their brand to maybe bring about some kind of social change, to kind of maybe bring down the materialism and the individualism that you're talking about.
Kind of like a Trojan horse in a way.
Yeah.
Like,
But I mean, yeah, so I think it just has to, culture is what changes most things. So somehow the culture of violence and the culture of, like, individualism, I mean, can be good, but it also, like you say, can be bad. So I think it's somehow, we gotta change the culture of the core values of stuff. But it's so enticing, social media, I mean, it's totally, yeah.
I want to answer this question as a member of a co-op.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jeremy, I'm a member of a co-op in Baltimore.
Shout out your co-op.
Water Bottle, that's a real estate co-op. Last year, we went to the United States Federation of Worker Co-ops in Chicago, and we had a black breakout session where we tackled the same issue. I will say that people are having conversations like black worker-owned co-ops are having this conversation about the friction between our individualistic capitalist culture, especially post-Reagan black capitalism. And how do we develop resources such as, what if we held, cooperative economics classes for youth? What if we're able to impact before capitalism comes a part of, black culture? What if we can, leftists, socialists, Marxists, etc. Where can we impact our culture at a younger touch point, but also understanding like the revolution will take time. So introducing the people to these ideas, we can't expect people to like, just jump into this, but the turning from this exploitative capitalist economy to a solidarity economy will be twofold. On the younger end, you have to use propaganda for like younger people in the same way capitalists use propaganda for younger people. On the other end, for those of us who are a bit more aged, a bit more mature, growing up in the system, we do have to break down these walls by, bringing the resources directly to the people and exposing the contradictions of capitalism, such as, I like to show people revolutionary suicide where Huey P. Newton talks about these things. Have book nights with people. Ask people directly, what do you think about this? Have them kind of work it out. We can't expect people to come to these conclusions by themselves. But I definitely recommend, for anyone interested in working on co-ops, the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. The conference I went to was very illuminating. I've only been in one for a year, but the conference, bilingual co-ops from all across the United States. Red Emmons was there. They won a prize, so shout out to Red Emmons. Yeah, there's a lot of work being done about co-op education on the younger end. But for those of us who are dealing with like adults, just chipping away at the prison of capitalism that lives within all of us.
Thank you for sharing. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, appreciate everything that's been said. Thinking about what you said, Taji, about black buying power, I think that part of the reality of Dr. Ball's argument is that the money has been extracted from our community. It's not the idea of us meeting our own needs. It's not inherently bad. It's just that cannot, without an investment of the money they've expropriated from our community, sufficiently meet our needs. Right, so I think what I'm wondering is, what is the political interventions and how do you get the support from people to support the political interventions to get these things to scale? Because just in terms of my conversation with folks that do different forms of cooperative economic work, they may not do it through legal entities that are one person, one vote. That I think like part of the anxiety about some of the co-op stuff is that, there are like rental co-ops and black people are like, hey, one of the very few aspects people have had in this country is a house, and given all the things that are happening in our world, wanting your own house is understanding, so I want to own, but I support cooperative economics, right? So there's also this tension of like, people want a sense of ownership that theoretically should come with co-ops, but in reality, knowing people that work for many co-ops, what can be flat on paper, in reality can be extremely hierarchical in practice. Right, and just because it's an LLC on paper doesn't mean it's inherently capitalistic in practice, right? So how do we deal with the tensions of co-ops in theory and co-ops in practice, and how do we deal with the fundamental question of what is the political interventions that can be made to get these things to scale, to get the resources from government, especially given that crime and poverty, they're about to put $6 billion into the city over the next 5 years.
get cooperatives operating at scale is a great question. I can tell you where I see like certain gaps, and I guess, and then there's also like different. So for instance, like agricultural cooperatives, that's a certain type of cooperative that tends to have an existing relationship with the federal government, and they get a fair amount of support already. So I think they, like in that cooperative arena, they may have a certain framework for policy that helps them stay at scale. For like worker-owned cooperatives, like which tend to be smaller, and you don't see too many of those. The biggest one in the United States is 2,000 folks in New York, Cooperative Home Care Associates. So this is 2,000 people. They own their workplaces, but they elect their board of directors to make their decisions. What kind of public policy could get that workplace arrangement at scale? If I knew that, I'd tell everybody. But I think you're right to ask that question, because I don't think that the solutions that cooperatives can provide can actually achieve that at scale without public policy. Right? So I think that's entirely correct to be looking at that. U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives has a body within it that's dedicated to lobbying and advocacy. I'll tell you, one thing that they're talking about has to do with the 501c designation, and tailoring it to make it more useful for what's called a social co-op. A social co-op, I'm still actually wrapping my, I just learned about these like 8 months ago or something. But these, there's a lot of these in Italy, apparently, in part because they have public policy to support them existing in Italy, which we don't have here. But basically, these are cooperatives that tend to exist in like social care industries, so like child care, senior care, and these aren't high margin businesses, so they tend to be subsidized by government. And so they've come up with some sort of public policy framework that allows for these social co-ops that address these high need but low, profit margin areas, provide their businesses both with subsidy and with, whatever revenue they can earn as well. So that's an example. I mean, it's not really an example. I couldn't break it down for you. So yeah, aside from the public policy, and then what was the other side of the question?
Well, just the distinction between co-ops in theory and co-ops in practice.
Yeah.
And I think it was just one of the comments previously, like I know there's like a tension to some folks in the housing co-op space. Well, again, black people want to do renter co-ops, but a lot of black folks are less interested in renting, they want to own something, right? And then there's like, this supposition that, almost like, are we only so poor that we can rent? Like black people actually have enough money to own, and we don't necessarily want to go to the market. But there's a gap in terms of sometimes where the co-op focus is, because again, the focus, a lot of it comes from like big cooperative apartment buildings that make in New York, where again, renters uniting in renters tenant rights groups. But again, people want to have a sense of ownership, not because they want to be capitalistic, but because they want to have an asset and they want to have something that's theirs, right? So it's like, how do you deal with this tension of people's concerns about co-ops basically creating informal hierarchies? I'm like on the author's name, but the tyranny of structurelessness, right? And so there's some people feeling co-ops can replicate those dynamics of informal hierarchy, and can you create spaces of ownership that are not exploitative to meet community needs?
Yeah, I agree. That definitely does happen. So even inside the cooperatives, you can have hierarchies emerge. Now, different co-ops have different, positions on this. Some cooperatives care less about preventing hierarchies in their structures, whereas others care more, right? So Red Emma's Coffee Shop is an example of a co-op that cares a lot about having a flat structure without having people reporting to people and layers of management. So they have, everyone who works there that's a full member is on the board of directors. They break up decision making. They find ways to make it more efficient as well, so they're not just having a meeting for every little thing. So that's how they're set up, right? that's how what their governance documents will look like on paper. So, bylaws and employee handbook. So by the letter, they're a co-op on paper, and they're a democratic business on paper, one member, one vote, right? But if one or a few people have been in the co-op for 20 years, right? Or, there's a strong personality in the cooperative, or, I don't know, someone's just real cool and everybody likes her, people are still people, right? So a big part of what we do at BRJA, when we work with co-ops, we wanna make sure they're cooperative on paper, and then we have to work with them on making it real in practice. And then in larger cooperatives, like we're kind of talking about, doing this at scale, there's another element of participation there. So like CQ and MEQ, right? These are arguably cooperatives, right? Most members of CQ or MEQ, they're gonna sign a proxy, right? They're going to give their voting power in the cooperative to somebody who's more tied in to the company, more active, more involved, right? They're probably gonna give that voting power away. They still have that power on paper, right? They can revoke that proxy and they can start going to board meetings for their bank and get involved in those decisions. In all likelihood, they might not do that. And then even on the smaller scale, you'll see variations in participation, right? So a smaller cooperative that's not as big as like a big credit union, a smaller co-op may struggle to have people come in for the extra hours of governing, right? So can you take, hopefully it's an extra time, but can you take more time, right, to take off your employee hat and put on your owner hat, your business owner hat, and do all these extra meetings, extra communication and decision making to also be the owner of your business. Whether or not you can actually do that is gonna affect your ability to participate in your democratic business, right? And that's affected by, so if your co-op, for instance, doesn't have enough margin, right, to pay people for those extra hours, right, where you're coming in after hours to make more decisions as a business owner, that's another stress point that co-ops can deal with, and that can have class implications, right? If some members of the co-op can take another 4 to 8 hours a week or a month, whatever it is, and just give that to the co-op, and others can't, there's certain class issues that can appear there. I'll pause there, yeah.
Thank you. All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up because it's 7:35 and I wanna be mindful of everyone's time. So we do have a few closing slides. And we'll go ahead and wrap up.
We got a little through. Oh, here we go. So first off, thank you all for coming. This is such an amazing job. Old friends, new friends, all kinds of friends. And Michelle, do you want to thank the panel?
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Marisela, Sean, and Taji, for not only for being here tonight, to meeting, before this, and the wonderful conversations we had, and I'm just very thankful for your time and your energy that you gave to this event.
And let's thank Michelle for moderating. And now we'll talk real quick about upcoming things. So next month, we're gonna be virtual again, and we're gonna talk about what is power. Over the past year, we've had all kinds of conversations with folks, some of whom are in the audience tonight, and one of the things we keep coming to is building power. We need to build power. We need to build power in ways that supports racial justice, all kinds of justice, but what is that and how do we do it? So we decided to actually focus on that. Next month, again, it'll be virtual. QR code is there, it'll be on the website and all your normal places for finding about BRJA events. So that's one thing we have coming up. And then for the white folks in the room, or if you know any white folks, we're doing 2 spring workshops for white people. One will be focused on exploring whiteness. What is it? How do white people bring it into rooms with us? And then the other will talk about white people in multiracial spaces. Rebecca Hobie, who's in the back, and I are facilitating these workshops. If you're interested in these, talk to us after the thing, or just use the QR code. That is also on the website though. Yeah, I think that's it. And our website. Yeah. You have a beautiful new website, please visit it. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.